Warning. I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
When the government told us that the vaccinated couldn't transmit it, was that a lie or was that a guess? Or is it the same answer?
I think it was hope that the vaccine would work in that way. And that's why I think scientists and public health leaders always have to be at the table, being very clear what we know and what we don't know.
This is important for the country to know. So when I asked the question, when the government told us that the vaccinated couldn't get it, and I asked you if it was a guess or a lie, you said you don't know. You said you think it was hope. So what we do know is it wasn't the truth. So they were either guessing, lying, or hoping, and communicating that information to the citizens of this country.
I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection, and I think we overplayed the vaccines, and it made people then worry that it's not going to protect against severe disease and hospitalization. It will, but let's be very clear. 50% of the people who died from the Omicron surge were older, vaccinated.
So people were threatened, coerced, lost their jobs, and suffered severe adverse reactions for hope. Yeah, okay. So Dr. Deborah Birx wrote a book called Silent Invasion, The Untold Story of the Trump Administration, COVID-19, and Preventing the Next Pandemic Before It's Too Late. I'll save you the trouble. It was a pretty boring book, but here's what stood out to me.
Were people like me and Tony, who had an even longer career in civil service than I did, being positioned as scapegoats in case things went sideways? Those with long-term Trump connections could insulate themselves from the president's hot-tempered wrath, not to mention that the roster had already changed, with Secretary Azar out as head of the task force and Vice President Mike Pence in. What this foretold was still to be determined. By having us around, the politicals, when things went awry, could say they'd gotten bad advice from the public health experts. They could easily blame the civil servants and characterize us as members of the deep state. These were realistic possibilities. On August 29th, I received a text from my friend Chip Lyons. He was contacting me on behalf of David Kessler, the former FDA commissioner who later served as the dean of the Yale School of Medicine, and then in the same capacity at the University of California, San Francisco Medical School. Chip stated up front that Kessler was then informally serving as an advisor to former Vice President Biden and was in communication with him regularly. Kessler wanted to be in touch with me, but he understood that I might be reluctant. I let Chip know that I was willing to speak with Kessler. At about this time, I'd been reading the Biden pandemic plan, which had been made widely available. In short, I was impressed by it, particularly because its emphasis on the importance of testing aligned with my own beliefs on that crucial mitigation tool. I wasn't sure what role, if any, Kessler had played in developing the Biden plan, but now, knowing that he was an insider on the Biden team, I was eager to learn why he wanted to be in touch with me. I suspected that it had something to do with vaccine development. I'd learned that the Biden camp was in contact with the various manufacturers directly, so in my mind, I believed they knew as much as I did. Perhaps they hoped I'd have some additional insight.
So you hear her say David Kessler here. I knew I had heard that name before. I recently made a video called Cancercrats about how the FDA, led by David Kessler, for years tried to shut down, charge, stop in any way a doctor in Texas that was actually healing cancer patients.
In my opinion, you have every right to use the investigative authority and the judicial resources of the federal government through the Justice Department to convene a grand jury. That's very appropriate. The first time, perhaps even the second time. It becomes questionable the third time, the fourth time, and the fifth time. It is not, I think, an unlogical conclusion to think that the FDA has a vendetta against Dr. Brzezinski or wants to retaliate for some reason. Now, that's my opinion. How many grand jury investigations have to occur that result in no finding of fault before you, as commissioner of the FDA, would encourage those within your organization to cease and desist?
Mr. Chairman, how do you know that there were no findings of fault that were returned from that grand jury?
There have been no indictments returned.
Mr. Chairman, I ask counsel to comment, But I don't think those are the same. As a matter of law, those are the same things.
I'm baffled by the splitting of hairs here, but
I'm just trying to understand the exchange between the witness and the chairman. What I understood the chairman to say is that there have been 4 grand juries convened?
at least 4.
I just am left then with a rather strong inference that if you convene 4 separate grand juries and there's no indictment returned, notwithstanding the prosecutors tell us always that it's possible to indict a ham sandwich, that probably there's not much there.
I wanted them to know what data we were collecting, so if they had additional data requests or additional thoughts, we could incorporate them. I was always open to learning from others and doing things better. Kessler came to my house shortly after the 29th, and I provided him with the samples of the daily reports, both my daily pandemic analysis and the 4-pager we created for the COVID huddle and governor's reports we'd been producing. I went through the data streams we had created to be able to get eyes on the pandemic across the country, from test positivity to cases to hospitalizations to deaths, down to the most granular level possible, counties and metro areas. Pictures and graphics told the story, some of which are still updated in the HHS community profiles we quietly posted in the late fall. He thanked me and said that he'd review them and get back to me with any questions or requests for additional data he thought would be useful to have integrated into the data stream we had created.
Dozens of Dr. Brzezinski's patients who had traveled to Washington, D.C. from all corners of the United States stood up and expressed their outrage with the FDA and Commissioner David Kessler.
The FDA has made a list and decided who can live and who will die. I guess I didn't make that list.
I've had no chemotherapy. I've had no radiation. I chose Dr. Brzezinski instead after a lot of research and a lot of searching. I've been in remission since 1989. Dr. Kessler, I'm not a statistic.
Back on November 30th, I had had my first meeting with members of President-elect Biden's transition team. Given how widespread COVID-19 infections had been in the White House, the team made the wise choice to meet via a Zoom call. David Kessler, the chief science officer for the response, was on the call as well, though neither of us acknowledged that we'd already been regularly communicating and that I'd been sharing data packages for weeks. For roughly 90 minutes, I filled everyone in on all aspects of the response, including the current data and the harrowing rise in slope of new cases.
FDA Commissioner David Kessler loves to grab headlines as a man who loves children so much. He wants to protect them from the ravages of smoking. If Dr. Kessler loves children so much, why have he and his agencies been trying so hard to cut off my son's last hope for life? Without this treatment, my son will die.
David Kessler also helped fast-track DDL, the second chemotherapeutic DNA chain terminator for HIV.
Bristol-Myers began sponsoring research on AIDS patients, but they performed no controlled study, never comparing DDL's effect to placebo in matched groups. The studies did, however, reveal a couple of additional toxic reactions not produced by AZT. It can cause fatal damage to the pancreas, and it can destroy nerves throughout the body. On an experimental basis, a number of doctors began giving DDL to thousands of AIDS patients who could not tolerate AZT. Hundreds of unexplained deaths occurred among these patients, but the FDA managed to quell growing concerns. The FDA Advisory Committee, meeting to vote on DDL's approval, convened in July 1991. On that day, the panel reviewed the sloppily gathered data on the drug, which was compared to unmatched and untreated AIDS patients from years earlier. On this questionable basis, the committee was told DDL worked as well as AZT. Given the astonishing lack of a controlled study, the panel leaned against approval. That is until FDA Director David Kessler personally intervened on behalf of DDL and pressured the committee to be creative. The members changed their minds, voting to license the drug, albeit with restrictions. Doctors could prescribe it only for patients they felt did not benefit from AZT, leaving DDL as a secondary treatment and the second drug ever to win fast-track FDA approval. But even 4 years after its approval for human consumption, Anthony Fauci, director for AIDS research at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, stated to the New York Times, DDL had never been compared with a placebo in a large study.
And Dr. Birx even admits to resorting to subterfuge to try to get her way, which is government mandates.
Our Saturday and Sunday report writing routine soon became write, submit, revise, hide, resubmit. Fortunately, this strategic sleight of hand worked. That they never seemed to catch this subterfuge left me to conclude that either they read the finished reports too quickly, or they neglected to do the word search that would have revealed the language to which they objected. In slipping these changes past the gatekeepers and continuing to inform the governors of the need for the big three mitigations, masks, sentinel testing, and limits on indoor social gatherings, I felt confident I was giving the states permission to escalate public health mitigation, with the fall and winter coming.
What the classical conventional medicine had to do for me was there, nothing. For me, the next thing was the minister. I did not want to undergo chemotherapy, which I had a new name for, chemotherapy, or any type of radiation. I was extremely lucky I found Dr. Birxin, and I don't want the FDA to take this right from me. I came 18 years ago from communist Romania, and the tyrannous dictator Ceausescu never stopped a doctor from treating anybody. How can we have something like this in the United States?
Fucking stoned. I got a motherfucking spaceship. Oh, fuck. Oh, cool. I got it.